Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for tuning in to the Ohio Dirt Track Podcast again. My name is Clint.
And I'm Jacob.
We are coming to you from our home here at St. Pete District Studios, downtown Mansfield. St. Pete District Studios is a full-service recording studio that can meet any of your recording needs. Rob will get you in and get you taken care of. Rock and roll, gospel, jazz, opera, heavy metal, you name it. They'll record it, even commercial or podcast needs. Rob has clearly made major improvements in the sound of the Ohio Dirt Track Podcast, and we appreciate him being a part of the crew here. For booking, email Rob at robinrecorder@gmail.com or find them on Facebook at St. Pete District Studios. So before we dive into our interview today with Brad Doty, I also want to mention that if you are finding us on Twitter at Ohio Dirt and clicking the link to listen, you also have the option to subscribe on the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Podcast, and now on Spotify as well. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and please, please, please leave us a review so that we know how you feel about the conversations we're able to have and how we're covering dirt tracks in Ohio. And one more thing, also, I've been working on a hat and decal design this week. We hope to have Ohio Dirt Track Podcast hats available in the next 2 weeks. If you're interested in purchasing a hat, please send us a message on Twitter at Ohio Dirt, or through Facebook at the Ohio Dirt Track Podcast. I believe the cost is going to be no more than $20. So please send me a message and let us know if you're interested in one of those, and we'll get an initial order put together. Jacob, we have a legend on the phone today.
Yeah. He kind of has a big name around this area of Ohio. He kind of has a big race at Attica Raceway Park coming up here in a couple weeks. Usually gets a couple cars.
He mentions that they made history with their old Outlaws as far as car counts. He talks about that in the interview. He is a former Rookie of the Year with the All-Star Circuit of Champions, and also a former Rookie of the Year with the World of Outlaws.
So today we have the one and only
Brad Doty on the phone with us today. All right, we're here on the phone with Brad Doty this afternoon. Brad, thank you for taking the time to talk to us here on the Ohio Dirt Track Podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Is it hot enough in Ohio for you right now?
Yeah, it's hot. I was in Pennsylvania over the weekend and got there Friday for Williams Grove, and it was 95 plus, and heat index was way up there. It's a little warm, but then on Saturday a big storm came through and cooled things off a little bit, and then of course I came home Sunday and today here in Ohio, as you guys know, it's a little warm.
We definitely would like to see some cooler weather, but we're not going to say that R word. We'll take cooler weather without that.
Yeah.
It's not raining, so I'll take it.
Exactly. Yep. We
want to talk about the Brad Doty Classic, and we're going to do that. But before we jump into all the details and that race, we want to talk a little bit about Brad Doty, if that's okay. You all right with that, Brad?
I'm okay with that. It's a subject I know something about.
You know a few things about that. I just want to ask right off the bat, what is your first memory being behind the wheel of a race car or anything that you were racing, and what track was it?
Oh, wow. My first modified, it was, when you say modified, it's not like any super dirt car, big block modified or the IMCA modified. It was just a crudely built open wheel little sprint car, or like I said, we called them modifieds, or sort of like a super modified, but it was just rough. And it was one that Ed Ottenshield started in, and it was probably 20 years old when he got it at 16 years old for his first race car. And then I bought it from him and had not raced anything. We messed around with mini bikes and motorcycles, but not raced a car of any kind, and jumped in that thing and went racing. And yeah, it was a real eye opener.
Do you remember where that was?
Oh yeah, Lakeville Speedway, Lakeville, Ohio. And what I remember most was this car had what they called a Ross steering box, and it was quote racing steering box, but man, that thing steered so hard. We had big car tires on the front and old straight axle. Kingpins were probably froze up, was part of it, but man, that thing, a 15 lap semi main or We ran basically the A main for those cars. I mean, it flat wear you out. And I grew up on a farm, so I thought I was pretty tough. But man, that thing would wear you out.
So that was the car you said Ed drove prior to you?
Yep, Ed Hodenshield. His dad was a local hero in this part of Ohio, and that's how Ed got interested in racing and started kind of the four of us: Ed, myself, Jack Hodenshield, and Kenny Jacobs. So the four of us kind of ran Lakeville and Wayne County locally, and we're fortunate enough to start winning some races, and all four of us moved up. Ed Hodenshield was a very, very good race car driver and equally as good at being a mechanic on the car. He actually worked on all of our race cars to help keep them running. And he just didn't have the desire to go full time as a driver. And but man, he was probably better than any of us as a driver.
Do you have a favorite racing memory racing around with those four guys?
No, not really. Like I said, when I got the little modified, Ed moved up to a sprint car. It was a spring front CAE car, which was pretty good for this area for that time. I don't know. It just seems like I don't remember any race other than I do have a picture of the four of us later on after we'd had some success. Lakeville had an open show, and we were all four back for that and have a picture of that. But there was a race, and it's on YouTube, where Kenny Jacobs was driving the 4J for Ed Reno and won, I think, multiple All-Star championships in that car. And Wayne County was running a sprint car race on a Sunday evening, and Kenny actually got a ride with it was formerly Ed Lynch's car, or Ed Lynch Jr. drove it, and they were bringing it to Wayne County. They called Kenny to drive it, and Kenny said, "Yeah, I'll drive it," because he didn't think Reno was going to bring his car. So I ran Bloomington, Indiana the night before World of Outlaws race, and drove pretty much throughout the night to get home. Hadn't been home in weeks. So when I got home, I was dead tired, but I wanted to mow the yard. I wanted to do things around the house. I wanted to just I thought, you know what, I'll take a nap this afternoon and be good. And Kenny found out that Reno was going to bring his car. And so Kenny called me and wanted to know if I would drive this. It was a black number 2 car. And I said, boy, I haven't been to bed. I said, man, I promised these guys I'd drive it. I said, now I got to find them a driver. And I said, okay, I'll drive it. And at that time, especially, I hadn't driven a lot of different race cars for different people, and I liked the seat, the way I wanted it, the steering moved where I wanted it, different things like that. And Ed Lynch had crashed the car the night before or 2 nights prior to this Sunday, and the front axle was still bent. There were still some things wrong. The steering wheel, for whatever reason, the foam had been burned off or something. But anyway, I'll try to make a long story short. I got in this strange race car, and Kenny and I had one of the best races I'd been involved with. He was faster than I was out in the open, and when we get to lap traffic, I'd pass him and catch him passing back, and then we get in the open, he'd pass me back. And on the last lap, coming for the white or the checkered flag, he went into turn 3, and I was able to get under him. And coming off of 4, I beat him by like a wheel or half a car length at the checkered flag. And so he got me the ride and talked me into driving this thing, and I go out and beat him then in the main event. So and like I said, it's on YouTube. A lot of people have seen it and talked about it, and it was a good back and forth battle. And I got to admit, the cars looked really slow. This was probably like 84 or 85, and steel block and all that, but that was a good race. Yeah. That's when you said with those guys, that's the one that stands out.
So you mentioned Ed and the Hodenshields, and you, I guess, to put a timestamp on it, did you say earlier that it was late 70s that you started?
Yeah. It's really odd because I ran like 73 or 4, this little modified, for about a season and a half, and then sold it. Was hoped to get his. I owned the car. I had an old motorcycle. I sold and bought the car from Ed, and then, was trying to get move up to a sprint car, and my mom and dad were going to try to help. Well, next thing like I said, I grew up on a farm, and so we sold the modified and just never gathered the money together to buy a sprint car. And then I finally got a couple opportunities to get in a sprint car, and finally won in '78. I won my first sprint car race at Lakeville in the Ken Botkins 00 car. And it must have been I believe '78. Yep. And then '79 I got in, which was Kenny's former ride, and it was the 6X car. And we won like 13 out of 16 races, I think they said, at Lakeville. And then at the end of the year, we went to Western Pennsylvania, and I hadn't run a lot without the wing, but we went over there and without the wing and ran second or third at one of the races, and went back, was in the dash the following week. Because the top 4 run the dash, and I jumped the cushion and tipped it over pretty good and over there, but it opened some eyes. And then the following, in 1980, they went to a small 16 square foot wing, and I went over there. Then we changed the car to 28, and I won the championship at Lernerville and Tri-City, and that's when I met Sam Bowers with Bowers Coal, and my whole world exploded. He bought a brand new race car from Nance, new enclosed trailer, new dually, and I guess rookie of the year with the All-Stars in '81, and probably wasn't ready, but we hit the World of Outlaws tour in '82, and I should have won 3 or 4 races leading late. One, for example, was Butler, Michigan, and white flag lap, coming for the white flag, blew a right rear tire with a lead, and so anyway, it was rookie of the year with the Bowers Coal car with the Outlaws in '82, and then finally got my first World of Outlaws win in '83. And so things just happened really quick for me. And looking back, a lot of things aligned just right to give me the opportunity and go out, and was able to run the World of Outlaws for several years.
So a lot of things have changed clearly over the years, and you mentioned earlier. I think you said Ed was the mechanic on a car, and that's a term that
crew chief
has now been is used as crew chief. Yeah, and I've heard a lot of conversation or interviews over the last 5 to 10 years about it seems to be that there's a lot of guys who are just drivers. They drive the car. I even saw a parody interview recently where kids were asking NASCAR drivers about specific mechanics of the car to see if they knew what it was. Is that, and that's neither, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but is that, were things the same in the mid 70s through the mid 80s, or is that something that has become more prevalent in the 90s and 2000s?
When I say mechanics, there was even the top teams, I guess there weren't as many people or that had specific jobs, and the mechanic literally was, worked on the race car, did the mechanical repairs of the race car, tuned the motor, did the chassis setup and all that. Well, now the word crew chief, and that's kind of taken from NASCAR, but especially at the World of Outlaws level, it has gotten to the point where the crew chief is more or less the team manager and probably tunes the engine and does the chassis setup as far as making the decisions on what shocks, bars, and that kind of thing, along with the driver. And the quote car chief is now the mechanic, or the mechanic is, the term would be car chief, where he's the one that does the maintenance on the car pretty much